Good. And it looks like Dwayne's here too.
Yes,
Yay.
I just saw you're on. So, yep.
Good. Hi. How you doing?
Good, good.
Oh.
So there is nothing in particular on tonight's discussion list?
Well, yeah. I don't. What do you guys want to talk about? We could talk a little about Boltman since we didn't have a meeting last week. If you want, we could talk about some of the stuff from this week.
I was going to mention about that little exercise with the synoptic, well, with
Okay. Yeah, and I
stories that
regret I
we-
haven't had a chance to look at the discussion board in over a day, so I haven't seen any of the recent ones. So, but what did you want to ask?
I was going to say that was a very interesting exercise to do that. Fortunately, I have a synopsis of the Gospels, a book, that,
Oh,
that
good,
has
good, yeah. Mm-hmm.
the four all side by side. So that was a huge, huge asset for me. But it
Yeah.
was very interesting because you got to get real detailed about the minute differences. One may delete one word.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the temple cleansing, in one case, there were in the three synoptics, one used the word Jesus, the other two used the word he. But anyway, It was extremely interesting about how some had increased and some had deleted, and identical word for word sections. It was really interesting to do that.
Yeah, they're exactly. Yeah, they're too similar to think that they were totally independent of each other, but their differences enough, and their systemic differences to think that one editing the other one explains at least some of the differences.
But it's easy to see that they're probably, I still hold along with the deal about the Q source. That seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one possibility. The Q source, of course, wouldn't play into the passage you're looking at. It possibly could play into the other passages that are being examined, namely the baptism story and what was the other one I had you do? Was it the I'm trying to remember. There was a third story. It was the baptism. It was
We had the Last Supper, but I haven't quite gotten in.
Oh, the Last Supper. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's not a Q story either. But the baptism one could have been in Q, because when you examine the relationship between at least the synoptic gospels and the account of the baptism, Matthew and Luke really look very similar to each other, and they both kind of resemble each other much more than either one does like Mark, but except there are a lot of similarities also between both of them and Mark. So that would be a possible example of Q, if there were Q, of Q coming into play. Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting to do, is you obviously could teach an entire course on, just the synoptic gospels, and what you would do, Dwayne, is take a look at the synopsis that you have, and if you could do it in Greek, all the more powerful. But even in translation, and then just go through and just kind of look systematically at the differences, and you'll start to notice that they're not just differences, but there's certain patterns, of the certain words that the evangelists tend to use as opposed to others. I mentioned like one little one that Matthew and Mark, the Lord teacher thing. So Matthew always has the disciples address the Jesus by Lord. Mark always has him address them by teacher. But in parallel stories, the disciples always look a little bit better in Matthew's version than in Mark's version. So that's another difference. And the sort of ambiguities that you see in Mark, where it just seems to be a little bit more roughly written, usually comes out a lot cleaner in Matthew, where there is a difference. So those are some interesting ones as well. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that.
And it's a good way to learn a lot about it, about the passages also.
Yeah, exactly. You really begin to appreciate the evangelists as being distinctive authors too when you do this, because the unconscious tendency of most Catholics, is whose main exposure to the Gospels is just hearing them read, is just to assume that they're all basically telling the same story. Yeah, from different points of view, but the different points of view is not really interesting. And so, what tends to happen is that most Catholics imagine that the gospel, they sort of imagine the Jesus and John sort of put into the narrative of the synoptics, and they don't really differentiate that much between the synoptics. So there's actually a lot to be learned by looking at them really closely, and that's sort of been one of the big gains this century is understanding the Gospels as really unique writers in their own way, and unique theologians.
I'm still amazed at how recent Bible study really is. I just assumed that ever since Christ died, and the Gospels were written and the letters were written, that they were being studied then already. But for several hundred years, people didn't have the Bible.
Well, right. Of course, they were being read closely by the Church Fathers. Read them closely too, but they didn't do the kind of systemic comparison that you can do now with just having a inexpensive copy of the Gospels in translation, where you can do a line by line comparison, a systemic comparison. I mean, Augustine did attempt that and sort of gave up about halfway through his attempt. Obviously, there was Tatian too, who had his Diatessaron, but a lot of the techniques we have today that are used frequently are indeed relatively new, and so the redaction analysis like you guys are doing now is not something that would have been done prior to the 19th century of too much.
Correct. And the technology we have today helps us so much, helps make it so much easier with the computers and. Yeah.
The University of Toronto website I think is pretty neat too. I'm not sure who built that, but so someone at University of Toronto did it. I go there quite a bit actually. When I'm doing anything on the synoptics.
I had a quick question. In our lecture this week, on page 8 of the PDF, you'd mentioned that you had in the attached movies. I will show you others. And I didn't find any attached movies, so I was wondering if I just wasn't looking in the right place.
Okay. Could you speak up just a tad? I had trouble hearing that. Let me turn my volume up a bit. Okay. What'd you say there? I'm sorry, Sue Ellen.
No problem at all. In our PDF for the lesson this week on page 8, you had mentioned in attached movies. I will show you others using a closer analysis of a couple of triple tradition stories and how they were handled by each of the three evangelists. However, I didn't find any attached movies, so I didn't know if I was looking in the wrong place or if they were just somewhere else.
I'm sorry. I'm still having trouble hearing like the part of what you said. Something about the PDF in on page 8.
Yes.
And you're asking what did I say there?
About the attached movies. Something about attached movies.
Oh.
But I didn't know if there were any movies in this year's lesson or if that was just something that.
Okay.
Before.
Movies. I don't think I made any. Let me look that up. I'm kind of curious now. Okay, hold on.
Is it the page?
Okay, yeah, let's find this here. So, okay, so here we are. So this is this week's lesson.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. All right. So page
It was page 8 of the PDF
okay,
version.
okay. Let's take a look.
I think it's the title is the bottom of 7 is more tendencies of Matt and Luke, and it's at the end of that paragraph.
Okay.
On page 8.
Uh-huh. All right, page 8. Oh. Triple tradition stories.
Yes, sir.
Ah, now I know what you're talking about. Okay. There were movies, but did I put them in the course?
I didn't see them, but I thought maybe I was looking in the wrong
Yeah.
place.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, as I remember, I did do some movies on that, and I think I still have them. Yeah, I'd totally forgotten about those. Okay, good. Thank you for pointing that out to me. I did one on the baptism, and I did one maybe on the temple cleansing. Let's see. Let me. And I think in the course version of this, the one that's on the content pages, I think I may not have used the movie anymore because I was going to have you guys look at it yourself.
I
But
see.
but I'll tell you what I'll do. At the end of this week, if I can find it, I'll post it. Okay, because I'm pretty sure I have it floating around somewhere.
I was just yes.
Yeah. So so what I do, it's an older movie. It's not a great movie, and I would definitely it's still in Flash format and stuff. So it may have may need to be converted to a YouTube format. But yeah, what I do in that is I just kind of talk about the differences between the story and the stories in one of the Gospels. And I'm pretty sure I do the baptism there, and I think I do something else too. I can't remember what it is though. It was years ago that I did it though. So, yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for noticing that. I probably should go through and edit those PDFs because they are a little bit of an older version. They're not very different, but there's some slight differences between this and what's in the text now.
Right. When I'm at work, I have to use the PDF because I'm not able to have the net. So that's yes when I'm at work because I can study when the students are studying, but I just it's easier if I don't.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. No problem.
And then I had one more question. If you can
fire
hear me.
away. Yeah.
Yes. On this, on our term paper proposal, do we need to have a working bibliography or anything like that, or do you just want to send it first?
Yeah, it's generally good if you have an idea of something to do for me to assess the project. If you can give me an idea of what some of the sources you have in mind are.
All right.
Because, sometimes people come up with good ideas, but come up with sources that are really, you know, they're not sources that are specifically keyed to the project they want to do. They're just very general stuff that they have off the shelf. And when in reality, there's been whole mini libraries written on the actual topic that they say they want to write on. So
Okay.
that gives me an idea of where you are in the project and whether, you know, it's going to be a good proposal or not. Do you have an idea what you want to do?
I'm still working through it, and I'm sorry. I think it's due like next week at the latest, and I know that I need
okay.
more.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you're not the
Okay.
only one in class. I think Dwayne has a proposal.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that there's a few others that do not.
Okay.
So you're not the only one.
Should we just email that to you, or did you have a certain place you wanted us to?
Let's see. Did I set up the form in here? I don't remember. Let's see. Term paper, submission topic. You know what? We could do it that way, but it might be easier for you if I just put an assignment here. Let me do that real quick. That way,
Whatever you. I can do it either.
that way you'll get a reminder for it. So, term paper topic.
And it's due in week 12, correct? Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can take a little longer if you need to, but obviously it's usually good to have at least a few weeks to write the paper. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So let's see. Let's get this set up. Edit. So here, post. Topic I do here with preliminary bibliography. There we go. Okay. All right. And uploads. And did I say in the syllabus that it would be due by the end of what next? Did I say the end of next week?
I think it was week 12, but I can look again.
Okay. All right. I will make it due. Another week. I'll give you, and then so it should show up on your dashboard as a reminder. Okay. So that's here now, and let's see. Is this? I want it to be.
Submit term topic week 12 is what it's saying.
Okay. Okay. So I think I put it.
I think we're on week 11 right now.
Yeah, you're on week 11.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I put it in there in week 12. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So
Thank you very much.
no problem. No problem. So okay. So what do you guys want to talk about? Do you want to talk anything more about Bultmann?
He's great. He's really interesting and kind of funny to listen to, and got a bunch of good points too. I was really confused and kind of pulled both ways on him.
Yeah. Well, usually most people will kind of rapidly dismiss Bultmann, but in reality, it's probably good to wrestle with him a little bit, because he's sort of one of the people, if you really understand his arguments, he's one of the people that for better or for worse have kind of defined the conversation since then, and you won't really understand 20th century Bible and 21st century Bible scholarship totally if you don't understand Bultmann, because much of what's written is a response to Bultmann one way or another. Now we'll look at Bultmann's theory, basically being kind of attacked and demolished in a later week by Richard Bauckham, but but the point is that Bultmann was very influential. He cited all the time. You pick up an article today, and typically the person will begin by telling you what Bultmann did with the passage, even if it's to do something entirely different. Ratzinger talks about him all the time. You'll see him frequently referring to Bultmann in his writings.
Right.
So he was someone who was really intrigued by Bultmann as well. Not that he thought he was right, but that in some ways he sort of forced Orthodox Christians to kind of get their act together where it came to history, and that if we want a religion that's truly historical, we're going to have to do work to kind of build that up again, because the historicity of the New Testament's not going to be assumed anymore. We're going to have to actually work to demonstrate that for better or for worse. That's just the world we're living in, and
right.
Because without that, there's a whole other interpretation of Christianity waiting that says you don't really need to worry so much about the historical Jesus. Because if you just treat him as a mythological construction of the early evangelist and sort of a reflection of the philosophy of early Christians, the theology of early Christians, then and then just sort of do your own theology based on that, that's maybe a whole other way of looking at the Christian faith that doesn't require Jesus be an actual historical character, or at any rate, it doesn't really depend on the Gospels being at all accurate in the Jesus that they're portraying. So that's probably not a direction we want to go in our faith, because if we do that, then what do we have at the end of the day? All we have is then as a philosophy, right? Jesus becomes, in some ways, just a projection of our own highest ideals, right? And then he then becomes whatever we want him to be. So
right, very realistic.
So yeah, so it's worth spending a little bit of time on Bultmann, and it's worth me trying to make Bultmann look as good as I can, because you then will appreciate why his idea had so much influence in the 20th century and even into the 21st century. So
I appreciated you presenting him positively, because it made it easier to see what was good, and then to realize, okay, well, but that's not quite where we are, and
right, exactly.
From there. So
exactly.
Thank you for that.
So yeah, what was I going to say? So Bultmann's influence is still very much alive today in form criticism. People don't do form criticism anymore the way that they used to, where they'll basically take a gospel and then tell you what the earlier versions of like the gospel was, and then how the church, the Matthean church developed and that kind of thing. That kind of scholarship has sort of gone out of style. You just don't see a whole lot of that. But if in slightly older works, and even today, it still will be taken almost as an article of faith that each of these gospels, even in its final form, was written to various communities. Matthew had a specific church in mind somewhere when he wrote his gospel. Mark had a certain church in mind. Luke had a certain church in mind, and John had a certain church in mind. And since John is so different than the rest of them, his community must have been a lot different than the other communities. And you cannot go anywhere today without hearing that, just stated as almost as though it were, a fact as plain as a nose in your face, right? I mean, that's just a given. Well, that's an assumption of form criticism, right? That the idea that the Gospels themselves, primarily reflect, they're reliable in the sense that they reflect not so much the historical Jesus, the way he really was, but what was actually going on in the church several decades later when the Gospels were actually written. That's what the Gospels tell us. And so what we end up doing is reading the Gospels in a really symbolic sort of a way. Like, for instance, when we see Jesus in Matthew's Gospel arguing a great deal with the scribes and Pharisees, well, it's not really Jesus arguing with the scribes and Pharisees. It's the followers of Jesus arguing with the scribes and Pharisees, or what's left of them, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. And, the gospel story is just written there to give them the sort of moral force that they need behind their arguments, right? And so, that kind of approach is sort of taken for granted. You especially see it probably the most noticeably when you read commentaries, even today on the Gospel of John, right? That it's going to be assumed that there is a specific Johannine community of Christians, and they are unique in terms of what they believe. And there's a lot of tension in that community between the Jews, that is to say, the ones who have a more Jewish interpretation of Jesus, who just see him in the way John the Baptist did as a prophet, and the truly Johannine Christians who see him as, the not only the Son of God, but God the Son, co-eternal with the Father. And so there's a process then of the, we see evidence of there's like three or four, there's like two cases in John's Gospel where in John 9 and John 16, where you hear stories that the followers of Jesus were getting kicked out of the synagogue, like in the life of Jesus. Well, they say, well, no, that didn't happen. During the life of Jesus, what that really refers to is, the Christians 40, 50 years later in debates with Jews, some of the Jews who were followers of Jesus actually, getting kicked out of synagogues because their belief in Jesus as God the Son of God, was anathema to his Jewish followers who only saw him, in light of John the Baptist. And so they sort of tease out these various factions within the community by looking at the tensions within the fourth gospel. And of course, if we had a course on John right now, I could show you various ways in which, you look at various texts of John and they stand in a certain tension with each other. But the point is like, that approach is taken as a given today. I mean, I would be very surprised if you have not heard a homily that makes where the preacher, the priest, or whoever, the deacon, makes assertions about the Matthean community or the community of Christians, and so that the gospel as it's given to us as kind of a transparency through which we can actually look at the community. Well, that's form criticism. That's all form criticism. That's the legacy. So you don't get the sort of hard-nosed Bultmann form criticism, but you get sort of a softer Bultmannism there, and that's very much around today still. That's a very common view that you'll hear taught in seminaries, Protestant as well as Catholic, and you'll still see it in commentaries. So that's still there. You'll also see another place you see form criticism at work is actually in the church's own document that was produced at the same time as Vatican II, which is called Sancta Mater Ecclesia, which is the document on the historicity of the Gospels, which we'll look at later. And I think did I talk to you about the sort of the historical event, and then the telling of the event, and then the writing of the event? Those kind of three stages.
Yeah, those three stages that it happened, and then there was oral.
Right.
Repeated orally.
Right.
And then written.
That's a form critical assumption also, that there's three stages of transmission in the Gospels, and that's I think that's probably one of the enduring areas of influence of form criticism. That idea that there was this oral tradition period, sort of behind and before the written Gospels, and that's the sort of connection between the written Gospels and the historical Jesus. Why do we know that there was an oral tradition? Well, it has to do with the fact that the stories themselves are rather portable within the tradition. And you kind of saw that when we did the synoptic problem 2 weeks ago, that, you know, the Gospels, the stories themselves, if you look at just individual stories, say the story where the disciples are, they get in trouble when they're picking grain and then there's a controversy that ensues. Each of those stories is sort of located differently. The healing of Peter's mother-in-law, the Beelzebub. So in other words, all these stories are kind of in packet form, and they're relatively fixed in their form. They change a little bit from one gospel to the other, but they are in a certain sense like beads on a string, in that the stories themselves can take a different order. And so from that, if you sort of reason your way backwards, you will come to the conclusion that these stories were once just beads, right? And the beads were the actual told versions of the story, which are probably pretty similar to the versions that we see in the written Gospels today, right? So, you know, when you see, for instance, the story of Jesus and the disciples picking grain, and then right after it is the story of Jesus healing the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath. It's pretty clear if you look at the way each of the synoptic gospels put those stories together, that those stories were almost certainly at one point told differently, and that the reason they're together is not because they happen one after the other, but because they both involve Sabbath controversies. And so for that reason, Mark, or whoever the first evangelist was, put them together. But so if you kind of take a look at examples like that, you kind of reason your way backwards to this period of oral tradition. And that's a pretty generally accepted thing, that there was this period of oral tradition, that the Gospels were not written as though the evangelists were following Jesus around, taking notes of what he was saying and what he was doing. So that's probably the two areas that are the most enduring of form criticism. But later on, we're going to see that this whole idea of communities and the idea of each gospel being addressed to a specific community is going to get really strongly challenged by Bultmann, or I mean by Richard Bauckham, by an article we'll read in a later week. And I think it will kind of rattle the cage a little bit of saying, well, you know, what's the evidence that these communities really even existed? Who's to say that the differences between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are, you know, owe just to differences of theological emphasis, and that, as we would expect, the fact that the Gospels are not really addressed to anybody specifically, maybe they were just written for general Christians, you know, as a whole. I mean, after all, they did seem to achieve a pretty rapid circulation quickly. Maybe there never was a Johannine community at all. Maybe John was different because he's more theologically developed than the others, but maybe there was no specific community he had in mind at all. Maybe it's just that, you know, he's writing at a time where his insights and his ability to build on what the synoptics had done was different. And so maybe there was no Lucan community or Matthean community or Markan community either. Maybe they just wrote for a general audience of Christians with no specific people in mind, and that we shouldn't be reading them like as though they're Pauline epistles that are specifically addressed to communities. So that's we'll look at that one later. I think that's pretty interesting, but you won't really understand how, heretical that article is until you really see how just dominant this idea of gospel communities is.
I have a question. Bible commentaries. Is there a good Bible commentary series that you recommend?
It's really hard to say about the series because a lot of the series have ones that, individual ones in the series that are awesome, and other ones that are only maybe okay. So, but if you were to invest in any one of them, Well, of course, it really depends on if do you know any Greek, or do the presence of Greek words like sort of intimidate you? Because the more critical ones are just going to use Greek words and assume that their readers know enough Greek. And if you can handle that, the International Critical Commentary series is good. They're sort of a little bit more scholarly in that word. I think the Word Biblical Commentary from Texas is good. They're of a more scholarly bent. They tend to.
Well, what was the name of that set?
The Word Biblical Commentary, the WBC, the Word Biblical Commentary. That's a good one. If you want to have fewer volumes on your shelf, another really good one is the New Interpreter's Bible series, which are they're in a smaller number of larger books, but there's some very good commentaries there, and they use all transliterated Hebrew and Greek, so you don't have to worry about not knowing Hebrew or Greek words. So
okay, I picked up one of their, I think on the Gospel of Matthew, maybe one time that I just picked up.
Yeah,
I have the Navarre set.
Yeah, the Navarre's pretty good. The Navarre's not bad. I think they're obviously Navarre's going to be a little on the sort of pre-critical side. I mean, in some ways that they're going to be much more sort of aggressive and defending, Catholic interpretations of things that prevailed, before the Vatican Council. So they're okay. I think the that New Catholic series is probably a little bit better than Navarre. What's it called? The Catholic. Let me look it up real quick. Curtis Mitch did one on Matthew. Let me look that up real quick.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Catholic Commentary on Sacred Scripture. It's through Ignatius. No, it's not through Ignatius. I'm sorry. It's what is it? Catholic Commentary on Sacred Scripture. Who publishes it, though? It is through Baker Academic. They're very good too. So they're kind of a little bit. They're not quite as scholarly as the Word Biblical Commentary series, but they're solid. And
I think I have a few of their books already.
Yeah,
that is one that's in the process. They don't have the whole thing completed.
Right. I don't think they've done everything yet. I think they just came out with.
And did Mary Healy do one of them?
Yeah, Mary Healy did Mark.
Yes.
Curtis Mitch did Matthew.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have those, and they're very, very good.
Yeah. So they're pretty good too. Yeah. So what else? I mean, the Anchor Bible.
When I was in the CDU library the other day looking around, there was a set there, and I can't quite remember the name of them.
In the CDU library?
Yeah. I thought I came across a set in there.
You mean the CUA library?
Well, it's through the website here.
Oh, I see. Yeah, she might actually have some in the in digital form. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, I haven't looked in a while. So what did you find?
I can't think of the name of the set right now. I wasn't planning on asking, and it would take me a while to find it up again.
Right. So yeah, each commentary. Yeah, each commentary series kind of has its own niche and its own particular time period and its own sort of target audience. So, generally speaking, it's good to look at a lot of them. And sometimes they're just single book commentaries as well that aren't part of series that are also quite good. What's the one that there's an older Catholic one too. Well, it's not that much older, but it's paperback. Let's see here. Yeah, the Sacra Pagina series is also pretty good.
Yes, I have a few of those.
Yeah, they're pretty good also. Although they're probably 20. Time flies. I guess they're really 20, 30 years old now. So, but those are not bad. Yeah, the Anchor obviously is a real standby, and the Anchor is going to be extremely thorough. For certain books like Raymond Brown's Gospel John commentary, the Anchor is still probably one of the the preeminent commentaries on the Gospel of John. And Joe Fitzmyer's commentary, Anchor Bible commentary on Romans, is probably certainly the most famous Catholic commentary in Romans. That's in the Anchor series. The Anchor series is not Catholic, but it's kind of ecumenical. So you'll get some Catholics and some people from different denominations writing for that.
Oh, okay.
So, but the funny thing is sometimes, as we'll see, sometimes the non-Catholic ones are actually better than the Catholic ones, and sometimes even more Catholic than the Catholic ones.
But Navarre would be very Catholic.
If Fitzmyer's commentary on Romans, in my opinion, is a little bit more Lutheran than like some of the Protestant commentaries on Romans, like N.T. Wright's. So yeah, they're all a little different, and there's a lot of different commentary series. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And I've got to get going now. It's almost 7:15 Central Time, and I've got
all right, good enough.
Commitment. So I'm going to go ahead and log off. And thanks a lot for this evening.
See you later, Dwayne.
Okay. Good night.
Good night. So, anything else, Sue Ellen?
No, I think that helps me a lot. I didn't even think about the commentaries, so that's good to have that because we're trying to build our library a little bit at a time.
Oh,
so
okay.
Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, every commentary has something to it. So some obviously are probably a little bit better than others, but so it's just a little hard to say which one you should get over others. When I was in school myself, I mean, I use kind of all the ones that I mentioned. I use the Word a lot. I use the ICC. I use the NIB, the New Interpreters. I used the Anchor. The Catholic Commentary in Scripture, Sacred Scripture, was not really available when I was in school, so I didn't use that so much.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's good.
It's good to have access to those, and I'll check the CDU website because the library does have a lot of resources that I haven't even gotten to completely go through it all yet. So that would help. But no, I didn't really have as many questions. We've had some weird stuff. I've got some medical stuff I've got to take care of tomorrow, so I've been a little affected this week. So I apologize for not having more questions.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Well,
I appreciate you taking time to do this.
No problem. So I'll take a look and see what you guys have posted on the forum. Okay.
Right. I'm gonna go look too.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
And I don't have any questions at all. I just tuned in to listen to the conversation. I came in a little bit late.
Oh, who's this?
This is Marie.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't even know you were here. I didn't have my screen open.
Yeah, I came in a little bit late. Was there any discussion about the topics for the term paper at all?
Yeah, I did talk about that a little bit.
Well, I just thought that using de verbum and verbum.
Wait, you're taking salvation history, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I in the wrong chat?
Yeah. So our chat actually hasn't started yet. So,
Oh, okay.
but I can still talk to you now.
No, I couldn't remember. Are you on Central Time or East Coast?
I'm Eastern. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got
Yeah.
another 15 minutes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
So
Then
yeah.
I'm gonna log out and I'll chat with you when I'm supposed to.
Okay. All right. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.